Daniel Ricciardo has been replaced by Liam Lawson since the Dutch Grand Prix, and during his 4 races up until now, he has impressed. Some people have even expressed the idea that Lawson deserves a full-time seat next year within the Red Bull group. But what is Red Bull's master plan for their next future starboy? Lawson has been helped during the last 2 races by the big AlphaTauri update, which had been implemented in Singapore. This resulted in a useful gain in Singapore and Japan. This helped Yuki Tsunoda to get into Q3, with Liam Lawson losing out by hundredths and starting 2 places behind in 11th place. Another impressive statement by the New Zealander. But it wasn't just his qualifying that impressed, as Lawson, the stand-in rookie, was outstanding last weekend on a course with which he is quite familiar, thanks to Japanese Super Formula. He passed Tsunoda at turn 1, the latter retaliated several times around the rest of the lap. It was a fierce battle, but at the end, Lawson came out on top. Tsunoda was plainly disappointed with how things had turned out. Lawson may have been expected to be enthusiastic about his chances of winning the intra-team battle. He dismissed it almost nonchalantly before describing his dissatisfaction and not being able to catch and overtake the Alpines in front of him, making it impossible for him to score points 2 races in a row. All he can do with this fill-in gig is make it seem absurd if he doesn't have a full-time ride here next year. And that's exactly what he's been doing during his debut races in the King class of racing. Even Helmut Marko, Red Bull's external advisor, had nothing but praise for the AlphaTauri driver. Does this mean we will see Lawson next year? Unfortunately not. On his sensational debut, Liam Lawson did everything right, the Red Bull advisor said. He will be a reserve for Red Bull Racing and AlphaTauri. He'll work a lot in the simulator and drive an older F1 car for a while. Then he will come into F1 more than well and prepared for 2025, concludes the Red Bull advisor. So for the fans hoping to see Lawson next year, I'm sorry, but you'll only see him in the Red Bull pit box instead of in the car. But there is always a chance he'll have a seat next year as Perez's future remains uncertain. And if he does, the seat goes to one of AlphaTauri's drivers. This would obviously mean that Lawson will take over the AlphaTauri seat. You have to be prepared, says Marko. We don't know if Perez wants to continue or not. We have to fill 4 cars, and you also need a strong reserve today. You have to be prepared, concludes the Austrian. So we won't see Lawson on the grid next year, and although this might be a shock to us, it wasn't for Lawson. He admitted that he knew he was unlikely to secure a permanent spot in 2024, even before the Japanese Grand Prix weekend. He made this public following the race at the Suzuka circuit. AlphaTauri declared during the Japan Grand Prix that the team will continue in 2024 with drivers Daniel Ricciardo and Yuki Tsunoda. Because Verstappen's colleague Sergio Perez is still under contract with Red Bull, there was no room for Liam Lawson. Lawson told Speed Cafe that he will remain a reserve driver. I'm a Red Bull driver. All the Red Bull seats are filled, and unfortunately for me, that means that for now, I'll be a reserve driver. Lawson is a Red Bull Racing official reserve driver. The New Zealander went on to say that for the time being, he's completely focused on the work as a substitute, and that only after that would he consider his alternatives. Once this stint that I have is over, then I can start looking at what options there are. But right now, it's focused on these races. Meanwhile, curiosity over Lawson's future persists, with reports suggesting the bright youngster might join Williams next season to replace the underperforming Logan Sargent. However, Red Bull team manager Christian Horner believes that is highly unlikely. Horner told Sky Sports that it is unlikely they will take on a driver for a year. In an interview with Sky, Horner stated, "It will be unlikely that they will take a driver for 1 year." By doing so, Horner appeared to imply that Lawson may have a future with the Red Bull squad in 2025. And next, some uplifting words from his team boss. Lawson has also allegedly signed a new contract with Red Bull, and this one comes with a guaranteed seat for 2025. That's why Lawson decided to stay at Red Bull as a test driver for 2024. And that 2025 seat will be at AlphaTauri, or will he be sent to Red Bull straight away? If so, would that be a smart choice? If not, who can fill Perez's boots? Or even better, who can stay competitive and happy next to Verstappen? Max Verstappen nearly single-handedly carries Red Bull Racing, and inevitably, the question of why his colleagues should be removed emerges. Nonetheless, it was clear at the Japanese Grand Prix why Verstappen needs a Sergio Perez-type driver as a teammate. Why tell this story after a weekend where Perez made so many errors? This tale is told from the perspective of other teams rather than Perez's. Mercedes, McLaren, and Ferrari allegedly deliberately selected a presumably equal and thus stronger lineup. However, the Japanese Grand Prix showed how difficult that may be for a team. It was most visible at Mercedes between the 2 drivers, who were increasingly ending up on the track together anyhow. The deficit averages 0.022 seconds in qualifying in 2023, the tiniest difference of any team. Of course, this is encouraging, but it also has complications. In Japan, the time lost as they battled each other may have also aided Ferrari in gaining extra points. In Singapore, you might even argue that Russell would not have crashed if Hamilton had been following him so closely. The same may be said of Hamilton's blunders in Japan with Russell behind him. Ferrari is experiencing the same issue. Sainz and Leclerc are also quite close, despite the fact that the astute Frederic Vasseur would like a clear number one, as he did at Alfa Romeo. Political and sports issues are also surfacing at Ferrari. Both drivers want to win, but only at the expense of the team. McLaren's dilemma is still in its early stages because Oscar Piastri is a rookie, but his contract extension through 2026 is begging for trouble. Lando Norris used to be the man who could defeat Daniel Ricciardo, but now he has to prove himself every weekend. You can already sense the building irritation. The two are now friendly, but what will happen if Piastri continues to improve and becomes better than Norris? Will they still be as nice to each other? Most likely not. As a result, an ideal number 2 is someone who contributes to the development of the car, while also scoring enough points to maximize his performance in the Constructors' World Championship. You can't claim Perez doesn't match that qualification, no matter how terribly he drove in Japan last weekend. Perez is now second in the driver standings, while Red Bull Racing has already been crowned world champions in Suzuka. The difference is probably a little too big when you look at the underlying data. Perez qualifies 0.385 seconds slower than Verstappen on average in 2023 and trails him 14-1 in qualifying. The disparity is comparable to that of 2021, 0.433 seconds and 21-1, but worse than that of last year, 0.309 seconds and 18-4. Perez and Red Bull had wanted to maintain that line, but there has been no word of it. Perez should be closer to Verstappen. During his time at Mercedes, Valtteri Bottas, for example, was often 2 or 3 tenths of a second slower than Hamilton. The Finn was often referred to as the perfect number 2. However, it is difficult to argue that Perez should simply be fired by Red Bull Racing, since who would take his place? Alexander Albon, 0.597 seconds and 17-0 in the 2020 qualification battle, and Pierre Gasly, 0.426 seconds, demonstrated that this challenge is not for an inexperienced athlete. Of course, the car was inferior to today's RB19, but Verstappen has a very distinct driving style that many drivers find difficult to emulate. So what characteristics distinguish strong second drivers like Barrichello, Mark Webber, Bottas and Perez in 2022? First, they prove to be extremely quick drivers when racing for middle teams. They have multiple seasons of F1 experience before joining that elite squad, and they are ambitious drivers, but not necessarily the best. In other words, quick drivers who are ecstatic about joining a top squad. However, only a few of them drivers are now in Formula 1. Carlos Sainz may be the greatest number 2, but he wants to be a front-runner. As a result, rumours of transfer to Audi circulate. Sainz has a lot of ambitions, which is why things aren't working out between him and Leclerc at Ferrari. Lando Norris is a driver who is frequently discussed, but you can't picture him playing second fiddle. That, in addition to Verstappen, is required. Verstappen needs all the support he can receive from Red Bull Racing until at least 2028, so you don't need a Norris type. He aspires to be the world champion. Perez's replacement is just not there yet, it seems. Their best bet seems to be Yuki Tsunoda, who seems Aston Martin bound when Honda will power them in 2026, or Ricciardo, who still has to get back to his best form. Furthermore, Perez has done the bare minimum in this bad year. He has a solid chance of finishing second in the race for the world title, while the Constructors' World title is already in the bag. Perez won 2 of the 3 races that were not won by Max Verstappen. As a result, he was frequently there when he was required to be. You might wish for more, but is it fair to expect more from anyone driving next to Verstappen? So what are your thoughts? Who should replace Perez in 2025, or even perhaps 2024? And what are your thoughts on Red Bull's plan for Lawson? It seems that the guaranteed 2025 seat is enough to keep him on board, and with the prospect of Perez leaving before the end of 2024, he could be driving full-time really soon.